Greetings, everyone. Joining me on today's Next Gen North podcast is Clare Martin. Clare has been a journalist, the first female and first Labor Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, and was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for her service to the people of the Territory and Legislative Assembly. In this episode, Clare walks us through life at the ABC, life at the top of NT politics, and her post-political career. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right, well, Clare Martin, thank you very much for joining us on the Next Gen North podcast. I understand you're a very busy person, so we appreciate taking time out of your day to come and be with us here.
Oh, it's delightful to talk to young people.
So most people, would know you from your very public persona as the Chief Minister of the NT. Labor's first Chief Minister, first female Chief Minister, and then even before that, a lot of people remember you as the reporter for the ABC for a number of years. But there was a Clare Martin before that, and before you were even a Territorian. Whereabouts did you come from before the Territory? What was your sort of Territory journey? How did that begin?
Well, I grew up in Sydney. I'm one of a family of 10, which is, people kind of go, wow, 10 kids. I was number 4. So we grew up in Sydney, went to school in Sydney, went to university in Sydney. But from the age of 6, which I think perhaps shows, I don't know, either imagination or a lack of imagination, I wanted to work for the ABC. I wanted to be a journalist, and if I could fit it in as well, I wanted to be a classical music disc jockey.
Wow.
So they were my 2 ambitions from the age of 6.
Yeah.
And I did it, which is rather nice.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just something you just fell into, it was actually, something you were drawn to from the start.
Yes, working for the ABC. I didn't realise there were commercial stations when I grew up. We're talking about the 50s here.
Yep.
So my family was an ABC listening family, and I just loved it. Yep. I loved listening to interviews on the radio. I loved listening to those who were doing the interviews. And I also, we were a family who loved classical music. So Mum, who, had these 10 children, she taught every single one of us the piano. Mm. Some responded better than others.
So did you study journalism in school, or sort of, how did your journalism journey get started?
Look, when I was coming through, so we're talking about the 70s here, I started university in 1970. Yep. There were no specific journalism courses. Right. The first one that developed was at Bathurst and in New South Wales, but that was later on. Mm-hmm. So you studied an arts degree or an economics degree or something like that. So I studied an arts degree with a music major. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. And then you branch off into journalism. Is that sort of how it?
Yeah, I did politics and other things in my degree. So then after that, I applied to the ABC to be a trainee.
Yeah. And what was involved as a trainee? Did they have you as a typist, or sort of, getting coffee, or how does that sort of work?
Ironically enough, I applied to be one of 4 trainees when 800 people applied.
Wow.
So it was pretty kind of eye-watering. So this is back in the end of the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get in. I made it to the last 8. Yep. So I said to the ABC, can I be a typist? And they said, okay, do the typing test. I wasn't much of a typist. Mm-hmm. And I got 34 words and I should have had 35. And I remember saying to the person who was monitoring me, look, 30, it's almost 35, it's fine. Yeah. And they said, all right, come on. So I got employed in the area I wanted to be in, which was current affairs radio. Mm-hmm. So I made my way up through the being a typist, and then when the next round of trainees was advertised, I think it was 1,200, right. But I made the last 4.
In radio, was it?
In radio.
So what was the first sort of role for you in radio? How did that look?
Well, the first role was being a reporter. There were 2 programs that came out of current affairs radio. One was AM and PM, and they're still going, which is amazing. And so you quickly learnt what it took to be a reporter, and they shoved a very large tape recorder on your shoulder, nothing like kind of very mobile phones in those days, mm-hmm. And you went out to do a story. Yeah. So it was really landing in the deep end, and there was an expectation that if you survived, you'd go on to be a full reporter. If you didn't, they'd bid you farewell.
So were you, at this time, was this when you were in Sydney or Canberra? Or
I was in Sydney.
Sydney,
yeah.
Okay. And when did you make the jump to the Territory, and sort of how did that come about?
Well, I was working as a reporter, so every day I went out and I did a story or 2 stories. And what I really wanted to do, and this goes back to my childhood, listening to those talk shows on the radio, the very early ones of them, I always wanted to do a talk show.
Right.
So I had an opportunity. I was invited by ABC Darwin to come to Darwin and for 6 months set up their first morning talk show locally.
Wow.
And it was a great opportunity. So I
sort
thought,
of similar to like what we're doing right now, almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thought if I go to Darwin and I really muck it up, nobody will know.
Yeah.
And I can just pop back to Sydney and keep going on with my career.
Tail between the legs sort of thing. And
well, you know, but you know, Darwin was. I
mean.
didn't know what Darwin was.
Right.
I had no idea it was something at the other end of the country.
Yeah.
And like very many people who live in places like Sydney and Melbourne, you just don't even think about Darwin, and I hadn't. But it seemed a great opportunity.
Well, I think that's what a lot of internationals think about Darwin. Unfortunately, you know, they come to Australia and they think, I want to see Sydney's beaches and I want to see Ayers Rock. And that's sort of where the story ends, right? You know, there's not a lot of interest in Darwin from internationals, and maybe even a lot of domestic.
I'd add domestic to that very seriously. I mean, I spent years being a tourism minister here as well as chief minister, and I used to deal with tourists coming to town, domestic ones, and just to a person they go, "Wow, is this what Darwin is?"
Yeah.
No idea, just a blank slate. And I thought the same blank slate I had in 1983 when I got off the plane and landed in Darwin in February and thought, "Whoa, this is hot."
So you only planned on coming here for 6 months, is that right?
That's what the ABC asked me to do.
Right. So your journey sort of in your mind wasn't really going to go beyond that. What sort of...
No, well, my career was having a trajectory past that.
Right.
You know, ambitious young woman that I was.
Yep. But Darwin was merely a stepping stone. Is that sort of how you saw it?
Well, you know, I was a good ABC employee and they said 6 months and then we'll move you somewhere else.
Right. So what kept you here in the end?
Met a man.
Ooh, okay.
I often talk about this with particularly women friends. Many of us are here because we came for a short term, maybe 6 months, maybe 2 years.
Yep.
And you meet a man.
Yeah.
And that changes your life trajectory.
Right. So this man...
Not a bad thing. I mean,
No.
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But that's often the reason.
Yeah. So was he working here at the time?
He was working. He's a lawyer.
Yeah, okay. And then that sort of changed your mind to not head back to Sydney, or, you know, you wanted to plant roots here, or sort of what?
Well, no, the ABC then said, well, you know, regardless of who you've met, you're going. And so I did actually work in Canberra for 18 months after that.
Right.
They moved me there, and David moved down with me. And then the ABC said, okay, we want you to move to Sydney. And I said, well, I'm moving back to the Territory. And I remember my boss saying to me, we'll find you another man. You don't have to do this.
Right.
And I moved back.
Yeah.
So that was my moment of real commitment. That was like, we had the house in Darwin and we were moving back to Darwin.
And where were you living at the time?
Where I'm living now.
Where's that?
I live in the Narrows. So 40-something years later, I'm still living in the house we had then.
Oh, wow. See, I thought the Narrows was a more recent development, but obviously not.
No, Narrows has been there for quite a while. Our house is a 1960s house, 1965.
Yeah, okay.
It's survived for Tracy because it's a little lower. It's in a thing called Narrows Creek, which was filled in.
Yep.
So, yeah,
oh, there you
we're
go.
quite an old suburb.
Yeah, so it's sort of like Ludmilla, you know, it's been there for forever. What was some of the more notable, stories during your time as a journalist, whether that be in, you know, Sydney or Canberra or up in Darwin? What sort of springs to mind?
When I was working for those national shows, AM and PM, a lot of it was politics.
Yep.
A lot of it were national issues, maybe not directly politics, but in the areas of health, in the areas of education, those kind of stories we followed. The Territory, of course, was different. Mm-hmm. The Territory, when you're doing something like a talk show that goes for 2.5 hours, you do everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got the politics of the day.
Yep.
You've got local stories about, you know, developments or all kind of things that happen not only in Darwin but across the Territory.
Yep.
And inevitably you then do things like new books and music and comedy and all kinds. I mean, those shows are incredibly diverse, and they were very diverse back then.
Because I've always wondered about the Lindy Chamberlain story. You know, were you in the Territory when that broke, or sort of how, you know, what's your memories of that one?
Well, the Lindy Chamberlain story really consumed the lives of those who were outside the courthouse reporting on it. So it was when the next to Parliament was the old Supreme Court, and I have very strong memories of all the kind of activity that was happening then. When it first happened, I was working in Sydney, so I was here for the Territory's appeal against the original decision by the magistrate in Alice Springs.
Yep.
So I would do daily stories, but I wasn't one of the reporters doing the immediate story back to the newsroom every day.
Yeah, because I've always been interested in, what the sort of public sentiment was at the time, whether, did people think she did it, did they not? What was your sort of gauge on the public sentiment on the ground, I guess?
Yeah, I could do you the gauge of dinner parties.
Okay, yeah, that works.
It was like an endless topic, absolutely endless and divisive topic.
Yeah.
For those who said, no, she's innocent, to those who said, no, she's guilty. And there was barely a kind of crossover in the two. So, but it did for years. It seemed to dominate Territory dinner parties. Yeah. And it was a relief when it stopped.
Politics seemed like it had always been an interest of yours. The 1995 by-election, so Marshall Perrin, who I understand was quite a popular local member, quite a popular chief minister, and you stood in that race. What were your sort of thoughts leading into the by-election? How did it come about? How did your entry into political life begin from an ABC journalist to then running for the Labor Party?
Well, when I decided to run for politics, I'd been doing journalism in the Territory for over a decade. And I think I was getting a bit restless. Right. I mean, I was a political journalist, and I did the 7:30 report here for 3 years, and that was really about, when you front the 7:30 report, you do the politics. So, and I think I was in my early 40s, and a friend said to me, was I interested in politics? And I said, I could be.
Yep.
And so that's how it started. It wasn't some kind of driven mission that I had in life. Mm-hmm. And so I stood in 1994 at the general election for the seat of Casuarina for the Labor Party.
Yep.
It was interesting. Some people said to me, oh, we always knew you were Labor. And others said, no, we thought you were CLP. So I felt quite pleased that I'd managed to kind of forge a neutral, as you expected with the ABC, a very neutral part. Mm-hmm. Your personal politics have to be put aside.
Sure.
So I lost in 94, and I thought, well, that's it, and went back to work eventually at the ABC. And then Marshall decided to retire the next year. So he retired in the May of 1995 after his rights to the terminally ill bill. His bill had gone through the Parliament.
Is that the euthanasia?
The euthanasia bill.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So he said, I'm retiring. As soon as it went through, he was retiring.
Okay.
So I took a deep breath and thought, maybe one more try. Mm-hmm. And so I stood for the seat of Fanny Bay and won by a small margin.
Were you confident going into that?
Oh, no. The Labor Party had been in opposition since 1974. There was no expectation ever that the Labor Party would win anything much, and we hadn't won a general election. We'd won a few by-elections. Mm-hmm. So there's probably a better chance of me winning a seat going into a by-election. Right. Mind you, I think I was the only one who thought I might win. The rest of the party thought, oh, here's a lamb to the slaughter.
Fodder. Yeah.
We'll lose this one.
Yep.
But it was the seat that I lived in. It was the seat that my children went to the school, like you went to prep school.
Which is important.
And to the childcare centre. And so I was a part of that, that
fabric.
suburb,
Sure.
part of the fabric.
Yeah.
And so I thought, if I'm ever going to win a seat, it's this one.
Yep.
So I won by all of 69 votes.
Wow.
Yep. Got across the line.
Yep. That's all you need.
That's all you need. You only need one, really.
Yep.
So 69 was extra.
Yep. So you held your seat in I think it was the 97 election, and then was it...
Grew the margin to 200. Oh, very good.
And was that under the tutelage of Maggie Hickey at the time?
In 97, Maggie was the leader, yes.
Yeah. So, and then shortly after she resigned, is that right? And you found yourself as the leader of the opposition?
A couple of years after 97, Maggie's husband was very sick.
Oh, okay.
And so she decided to stand down as leader.
Yep.
And there was just a small group of us. and I always say it was my turn.
Right.
And when I got elected by my colleagues as the Labor leader in '99, I headed off to Canberra to meet my colleagues federally. And to a person, they said, "Oh, you're the one who's got the worst job in politics in Australia." And I thought, thanks, great. That's great. Thanks for your support, guys.
Yeah, vote of confidence.
Yes, vote of confidence. You're hopeless. They added all these other things to it. Labor's never going to win in the Territory. You're hopeless. You don't know what you're doing. And I thought, oh, that's a good start.
Well, I remember Maggie Hickey was a neighbour of a friend of mine in Tennant Creek. So, So she always just remember she always had this lovely garden that she would sort of be pottering around in. So I've got, not fond memories of Maggie in those days.
And it's a really hard gig being the opposition leader or the chief minister coming from Tennant Creek because it's such a long, it's a journey going home. And it means that you kind of spread incredibly thinly. And I watched that with Ian Tuxworth when he was chief minister.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And I watched it with Maggie. It was a hard job, very hard. Compared with me being the opposition leader or the chief minister, I mean, if I get the lights, it's about 6 minutes from where I live to town.
Yeah. So, leader of the opposition, you've got a couple of years out from the next election.
I've got the full support of my colleagues in Canberra.
The vote of confidence. So, what were your sort of thoughts going into that election? I'm not sure what how the bookies had it. What the sort of public sentiment was, whether Labor could pull it off. What was your thoughts? What was your strategy going into that election? What were going to be the issues? What were going to be the things that were going to turn the seats to Labor?
Look, the biggest issue by a roaring mile was mandatory sentencing for property crime.
Right.
And that had been introduced a few years before by the government.
Yep.
And it was in response to a rash of property crime that was happening across the Territory.
Yep.
And it was a very controversial policy, legislation. And it had the federal government contemplating intervening on the Territory and overturning the legislation. Now, they had intervened not long before on the rights of the terminally ill bill, and they had then taken away our ability to have that legislation. So people knew that they could do it. And so this discussion was very alive, and it was very controversial and quite bitter.
Yep.
So that was the big issue going into the 2001 election. But as a party, we didn't support it. We didn't support somebody being locked up for their third offence, regardless of what it was. So we felt that the magistrate should be making good and solid decisions about it. So we put an alternative together.
Yep.
Called it our 5-point plan.
Okay.
No, 6-point plan. Sorry, I forgot one. 6-point plan.
Yep.
And that was the biggest issue. And I mean, there were others around. There were others about the economy being flat. There was others about the role of Pauline Hanson's One Nation in the Territory, which wasn't wildly supported, but it was there as a factor.
Right.
And that's where we went into the election. I'll never forget I didn't think we would win. I had prepared a bit of a speech we won 3 seats. So haven't we done quite well?
Yep.
Or we had won 4 seats. But I never imagined we would win those extra seats to take government.
Yep.
So election booths on that day, you're too young to remember probably, but there were all these red and white signs on every booth saying Labor will remove mandatory sentencing.
Right.
And each time I went to one of the booths during the day, I thought, nah, we're done. The polling showed that people supported mandatory sentencing. And I thought, we're going down big time.
Yep.
And I felt really sad for all the people I'd persuaded, good people, to stand. And I thought, this is going to be another loss for the Labor Party. So I was as shocked as anyone when we won. Seriously shocked. Kerry O'Brien, who's the ABC, he runs the desk on election night. He said he'd never seen a more shocked person than me.
A shocked winner.
A shocked winner. We weren't quite the winner on the Saturday night. We had to wait a few days. But he said he'd never seen anyone as shocked. I said, oh, thanks, Kerry.
So can you just quickly explain maybe some of the fundamental differences between the CLP's mandatory sentencing policy in those days compared to your 6-point plan? You don't have to go into it in too much detail.
Oh, no, that'd test my memory far too much.
Just the high. Do you have a high level sort of difference?
Ours was about giving magistrates the ability to respond to the crime that was actually committed at the time.
Okay.
And
without any sort of preconceived.
The saying mandatory sentencing property crime, it was 3 strikes and you're in.
Right.
So if you had done 2 minor offences, I don't know, the kind of things that were around where people would go and take a beer from a beer fridge or do something like that in property crime.
Yep.
The third time that happened, even though there was no, violence associated with it, there was nothing like that, you would go to jail.
Yep.
And we considered that unfair. We wanted the magistrates to deal appropriately with the crime that was committed at the time.
So in your mind, the crime, the punishment didn't fit the crime, so to speak.
Punishment didn't fit.
Yep.
It needed
Just
a much
too
more.
severe.
And of course, one of the big things that was part of that election, and it rolled in with mandatory sentencing, was we had no methadone program here. And so there were those who were addicts who were supporting their addiction by breaking into people's houses. And that was one issue that was, every second or third door I knocked, people were saying, oh, somebody's been broken into, in this block of flats, or somebody's been broken into down the street.
Yeah.
And we said we would introduce a methadone program. And governments, when they've been in a while, can sometimes get a bit fixated by staying with a policy that they had maybe 5 or 8 years before it and never changing it. And this was one of the ones for the CLP.
Right.
They weren't prepared to look at it in light of the fact that there was a lot of property crime. So we said we would, we did, and the figures on property crime just dropped dramatically.
Wow. So methadone, I thought that was associated with drug addiction. That's not alcohol related, is that right?
No, it's for specific. It's a replacement for heroin.
Right. That's
so
what opioids.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the loveliest things that I remember when I think about that methadone program we introduced, I used to hold barbecues at my public housing blocks. And one of the first ones I had after we'd introduced methadone. So, somebody who previously needed to raise money would be going to a chemist and having their shot of methadone. So it's fine, their little cup of methadone.
Yep.
And these couple of guys come up to me and said, oh, Claire, thank you for the methadone program. And I said, oh, that's great. And they said to me, you've got no idea what we had to do before you brought it in. I said, don't tell me.
Yep. I don't want to know.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. But it's really good that you're making use of this.
Yeah. And
sadly for the CLP, they used to say, if you've got a heroin problem, just leave town.
Right.
So it wasn't providing a solution.
Yeah, okay. So for those then, so we've got, elevated crime at the moment, and then there's proponents of bringing back mandatory sentencing. What do you say to those people that are, proposing to bring mandatory sentencing in?
Well, on one hand, we've got a lot of commentary about the jails are full. So we have to recognise that, and the expense of constantly having to expand the jails because we've got more people in.
Yep.
But the other thing is to appropriately convict people for the crimes they commit. So once you get into the mandatory, people are going into that full jail system for perhaps not the best outcomes,
right,
and they could be dealt with differently. I'm not saying be soft. I'm not saying that at all.
Yep.
But I'm saying you have to deal with the crime as being committed.
Yep. And there seems to be more of a focus, I think this is both sides of the political aisle as well, on rehabilitation. Don't just sort of lock people up, throw away the key. We've got to rehabilitate them. I think the CLP were talking about, you're going to learn job skills. If they get elected, they're going to bring in that type of policy. Would a Clare Martin-led government today, is that how you would approach, crime and punishment, rehabilitation,
rehabilitation has been in the system stronger and weaker over decades.
Right.
There have been very good examples of rehabilitation of particularly juveniles, but also adults, and that is part of our jail system here in the Territory, and it's part of everyone's jail system. So rehabilitation is really important. And I used to say to my colleagues, rehabilitation is absolutely vital because people get out of jail and someone who you've locked up will be standing behind you in the queue at Coles, and you want to feel that they're okay, that they're going to be a good citizen.
Yep.
So there's many reasons for having good rehab. It's a challenge. I won't pretend that it's an easy thing to do. And often, I remember the people who run the jails saying to me, look, it's really hard if you have people who are just going to jail for a couple of months, really hard to get them into rehab. The system doesn't work that quickly.
Right.
So, it would help us do good rehab if they were in the jail for about a year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Not a good reason for keeping them longer. No, of course not.
Yeah. So going back to 2001, so you've won government after being in opposition for, I think it was 27 years.
27. Well, Labor being in opposition.
Sorry, Labor being in opposition.
None of the team had been there for 27 years.
Was it a bit of a what now type situation? You've won government after the CLP being in power for so long. Was it a case of sort of having to try and unwind a lot of things that were already in place? Did you trust the bureaucrats that were already there, to fulfill your agenda? What was that sort of feeling like?
We had a very honed down policy that we took in. We really focused on health, education, community safety.
Mm-hmm.
We had infrastructure programs, but we kept it very simple. We didn't have a lot of resource to work up really complex policies. So we had policies that really focused on having more nurses, more police officers, more teachers. Mm-hmm. We also, just trying to recall this now, it's been a while ago, we weren't saying we would change. The thing we were most likely to change, we were going to change, committed to change, was legislation around mandatory sentencing. Mm-hmm. We also said we would bring in areas of transparency into government. So we didn't have freedom of information. We didn't have whistleblowers. We didn't have those kind of elements that make for a much more open parliamentary legislative system. So, we brought in things like estimates. Mm-hmm. The things that we take for granted now, we didn't have.
Yep.
So we knew what we wanted to do, and there were people in the team who were probably a bit suspicious of the public service. Mm-hmm. Public servants who'd worked with CLP governments, the other side, for 27 years.
Sure.
And I said to them, for heaven's sake, they never had a chance to work with Labor. Just get over it and let's get to work. And I was absolutely delighted by the support we got from the public sector. Mm-hmm. Absolutely delighted. And the experience, probably the senior ones were horrified because we had no experience as legislators and as, running a government.
Yep.
But they were so supportive. Anything we asked would be explained. Good ideas. I always say, be careful of a politician with a rush of blood idea. You've got to be careful. And and so we would have the ideas often, and the bureaucrats would sort them into a reasonable policy that could be implemented.
Well, that's really good because it means hopefully you've got a working democracy.
Absolutely, but you can imagine after 27 years that people were a bit edgy.
Yeah, so that's prompted my question.
Yeah, and they were edgy, and very soon the public sector showed that they were on our side.
Yep.
I'm sure if there are people who didn't want to work with us, they just disappeared quietly.
Yep. So you mentioned something earlier, one of your policies was more nurses, more police. What was your approach to doing that? Because, I know we've had a lot of police, attrition in the police force, and I just wonder how you did things to actually attract and retain police, nurses, all those public servants that we need. What are some of the strategies that maybe worked back in your time that might be able to work today that I don't think seem to be working as well?
It's a different world. It is a different world. And we didn't have particular trouble in attracting those extra. We only had 100, so we were talking about 100 police, 100 nurses, 100 teachers.
Yep.
And they were fairly easy to attract here.
Right.
There was a bit of a tricky situation between the states and the territories where if one jurisdiction was starting to pay nurses more or police more, another would suddenly, it became this kind of bidding war.
Yep.
So that was tricky.
Yep.
But we managed to fill the positions we needed to fill.
Okay.
So we weren't saying throw out the education system of the previous governments or the health system or whatever.
Yep.
We were just trying to kind of build them and add more resources to them.
Oh, great.
We wanted, say, in health particularly, to see a greater focus and a greater resourcing into primary health care. Mm-hmm. The hospital always struggles. Hospitals across the territory struggle with demand. And we thought, well, you have to keep the hospitals fully funded, but we found extra money to put into primary healthcare.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to read some of the statistics under your leadership, which I thought was quite interesting. So by 2005, the NT under Clare Martin's leadership had achieved the following: the highest economic growth in Australia at 7.2%, the lowest small business taxes, record population growth, the highest building approval rates, surging house prices and record levels of home ownership, property crime had almost halved, and approval for the $1 billion development of the Darwin Wharf precinct. I think currently...
Sounds quite good, doesn't it?
It sounds incredible.
The numbers are great. Thank you for reminding me.
I mean, well, relative to today, I think, it's almost the opposite on many of those things. Like I think we're, with housing, we've got 270 houses that are supposed to be built this year. That's down 55%. Record population growth. I think we've got net negative population flows at the moment.
Only about 3,000.
Okay. But for a small jurisdiction,
it's significant.
It's not great, is it? So when you look at sort of what the numbers were, under your stewardship and what they are now, how does that sort of make you feel? Does it do you feel like we've progressed as a territory, or have we sort of stood still? Are we going backwards? How do you sort of see things at the moment?
One of my big ambitions as Chief Minister, the unexpected Chief Minister, was to try and take that up and down out of our economy. We're very, very boom bust, very cyclical. And so we looked at the elements of how we could do that. We tried to take pressure off business in terms of the business taxes. We constantly were working with the federal government, which was the John Howard government. We had some good luck about the GST, which we were just transferring into being our funding body for all the states and territories. Yep. And the national economy was actually growing quite strongly, which meant that the GST pool grew quite strongly. Right. So from an economy that in 99-2000 here was flat, there was no growth in the economy, with the assistance of the GST and a greater funding pool coming to the territory, but also with a lot of activity. I mean, I travelled a lot. Promoting the territory, promoting the opportunities, and I think we did quite well out of that. Mm-hmm. So that mystery of what is this territory and what do you do if you live there, we were trying to break that down. Right. And I think we did quite well. Yep. So but we did have money luck on our side. There was money luck. Right.
So some of it is sort of, it's your own expertise in terms of governing, but it's also you're sort of a product of your environment in some ways, and you're a product of, I guess, externalities as well.
Yes, I mean, if we hadn't had the increase in the GST, we would have struggled. Yep. But there was interest in the territory. I spent a lot of time talking to the top end of town, around the country. There was interest in investing in the territory. So when we did something like the waterfront development, and we put in a significant amount of funds to kind of facilitate that happening with the private sector, there was a lot of interest. So that kind of was an indication of that the territory was being taken quite seriously. But I never felt as though I really stopped that cyclical. You always knew that it was hanging around to start again.
Just looming.
Because we're a small economy, if things aren't growing strongly, they can fall off the edge.
Right. You mentioned something quite interesting before about travelling and selling this small sort of backwater called the Northern Territory.
Not a backwater. I used to go and say, when you live in Melbourne, how many neighbours have you got? And they'd kind of go, well, there's Tasmania and a few around. I'd say, we've got 500 million neighbours. That's where we are. We are at the top of Australia. We are close to Asia. And, we are actually much more in the centre of things than perhaps Canberra is.
Yeah. I think that's a really good segue into INPEX. Now, I've heard various anecdotes about how INPEX was convinced to bring their business to the territory, so to speak. What I've heard was yourself and Paul Tyrrell basically hijacked a Western Australian government meeting with a Japanese business delegation with a folder saying, here's the territory, here's what we can offer you guys, sign on the dotted line sort of thing. But what are the facts behind?
Well, that sounds a very dramatic one, doesn't it? Yeah, but not accurate, I have to say.
Because I was actually in government as a graduate in 2011, and so I sort of heard all these sort of this innuendo about how INPEX was brought to Darwin. And I thought I'd love to hear Clare tell the story in her own words.
Well, Impex was looking at the Kimberley, and they were looking at building a community in the Kimberley, and it was causing lots of trouble. There was lots of trouble with the native title holders, with the environmental aspects of what they were trying to do. And we were watching this from Darwin and looking at how we developed gas resources at the time, more focused on gas resources closest to us than the Ichthys field, which was way in West Australia.
Yep.
But the idea came to us that it would be a good idea to maybe suggest to Impex that if they were prepared to put in a very long pipeline of about 1,000 kilometres, that we had everything they needed. We had a city, we had schools, we had aeroplanes, we had all those things, and we were connected. So we said to West Australia, Alan Carpenter at the time, we're going to go and we're going to put an alternative vision to Impex. So I went to Impex and said, in Japan, and said, look, you're having a lot of issues over in the Kimberley. Do you want to take a look at what Darwin has to offer and what it would mean for you to come and do the plant in Darwin? Mm-hmm. And initially wasn't enthusiastic over the lunch, but by the time we got to the end of the lunch, it was, I'll send a couple of people over from Perth, and we'll see what it's involved. Mm-hmm. And Impex decided that was a good alternative. Right. I always thought we were Plan B. And when we had all the commemorations or the celebrations around the Impex plant and what was involved, there were many aspects of that celebration. I found out I was Plan C.
Right.
I said, "How come I was Plan C? I gave you Plan B," and they had another plan up their sleeve.
Where was?
I've forgotten where it was.
Did you ever hear about it?
Yes,
yeah.
but
okay.
So I think Plan B was a floating facility.
Yep.
I could be wrong. Sorry, Impex, if I'm wrong. But anyway, so it was still done. There was no sneakiness.
Yep.
And we just said, look, you've got all this problem with native title laws. You've got environmental laws, which are you're in a pristine environment. Mm. And Darwin is a city that can support you. And I remember kind of some level of commentary about how expensive 1,000 kilometre pipeline was.
Yeah.
Still was very expensive at the time, but it came here.
Yeah.
And I think Impex was very pleased.
And so how are you, looking back at it now, how you sort of see Impex's or the Ichthys's impact on Darwin and the Northern Territory?
Well, the first impact was with ConocoPhillips when they built LNG1. So that was, if Impex wasn't the first LNG plant here, so that was ConocoPhillips.
Yep.
And ConocoPhillips came in at a time when our economy was very, very flat. And when they made their announcement that they were going to develop Bayu-Indon and bring a pipeline into Darwin and build the LNG plant, the economy started turning here. Mm-hmm. It was just a confidence thing.
Yep.
And from being a flat economy that we couldn't quite work how to give that jump to,
yep.
ConocoPhillips started that process.
Yep.
So in effect, Impex a few years later built on that.
Right. So Beetaloo, do you think that, I think what the latest government's done with their gas reservation policy is a really good thing. Do you think, getting Tamboran involved, do you think that to people's bottom line, to the people's power bills, do you think it's going to have an impact? Because just for a regular Joe like me, that's probably the only thing that you're really concerned with when you hear that the government's brokering these massive deals with gas giants. Do you sort of see that as going to be beneficial just to regular people?
Look, I think people here have two aspects to that. Of course, we don't want to pay really high power bills.
Yep.
And I have a power situation where I've got solar on my roof. I'm in credit
yep.
to Jacana. So, there's so many of me around who are actually, during the day making their own power, mm-hmm. that for me personally, a power bill is not an issue at the moment, which yep. I feel very lucky about. But Territorians want to see development. Mm-hmm. They want to see us to get out of this, boom and bust cycle. They want to see us become a more secure economy. Parents want jobs for their children. Parents want jobs for themselves. And even though most people don't want to see the population of Darwin grow, mm-hmm. they know with some growth we'll have that more stable economy,
Yep.
so a more certain economy. There are so many opportunities with the gas from Beetaloo and gas from other places. Gas is not all about making power. Gas is about inputs into making things that we use every day. And that, to me, is where the focus of Middle Point should be, also the development,
Yep.
middle arm development.
Yep.
And it certainly should be, we should be looking at other methods of creating our power. And we have very many options there. We've got solar, we've got hydrogen, we've got wind, and we shouldn't be seeing it as only Beetaloo gas for energy. There will be some transition. We know that there's got to be transition with gas. You know, it's impractical, it's unrealistic to think that we can suddenly turn off gas and that we'll have a secure power generation for Darwin. We won't. So we've got to transition well, but we've got to be carefully doing all the things that means that we are at the forefront in hydrogen, or at least going with others' technology, that we're using our solar. You know, we've got such capacity with solar. And so it's not a kind of one-trick pony, this gas thing.
Yeah,
it's many things.
Yeah, so you're sort of referring to using it as a feedstock.
Feedstock,
for,
absolutely.
You know, making fertiliser and
but making also
hydrogen and that sort of thing.
But also making the things that we use. You know, the elements of things that we use in mobile phones, that we use in our homes, everywhere.
Yep.
They don't come from nothing.
No, that's right.
They come from feedstock.
Yeah, that's right. So Labor, you know, has a pro-gas policy. Do you think, you know, with a looming election, do you think that's going to sort of impact their popularity maybe more among sort of Green voters, or, you know, do you see potentially Greens' preferences maybe flowing elsewhere due to their pro-gas policy?
Well, you've got both major parties who are supporting gas. So, and if you look around Australia, both major parties, or the three parties around Australia, are all supporting a sensible use of gas as a transition fuel. So here we've got issues around Beetaloo, and, you know, absolutely support the right of everyone to make their protest about that or to make their arguments about that.
Yep.
But I'm sure in the coming election that there will be quite a strong Green vote.
Mm-hmm. Do you see maybe the potential for a Green to win a seat in this election, or do you think that's maybe a bridge too far at this point?
Well, so far it has been a bridge too far.
Yep.
And there are some seats where the Greens are focusing their energies and their resources.
Yep.
And I'm bad at picking winners.
Okay, we'll leave it there then. So we're just staying on the economy for a second. So major projects, you know, we talk about Sun Cable, you know, the potential for solar in the territory. We've got sea farms, which has gone into voluntary administration. Had the problems with the ship lift. Does the way the Northern Territory government approaches major projects need some kind of reform, or do we need to change tax somehow? It just seems like a lot of projects with major projects status seem to be, I don't know, just encountering troubles. I understand, so since 2001, which I'm assuming was under your government, we adopted a more of a case management approach, you know, with major projects, awarding major project status, that sort of thing. How do you sort of seeing major projects going forward? Do we sort of need to change our approach?
Well, back in, when was it? It's a few years ago now, when the Territory Economic Reconstruction Commission was in place, or committee was in place. There was a very solid look at all those processes around major projects. There was a very solid look led by Andrew Liveris, look at how government agencies approved projects, whether there was too much of the eternal red tape or beige tape or green tape or tapes of various colours.
Yep.
And there was a very serious look at that. So I'm very confident that the major project status is a good thing, and that one of the things that came out of the Turk process was that government should be more actively backing projects. Don't be too uncertain about them. Take a chance. And so I think it's good that government takes a chance on projects. They are private sector projects, but government is actively supporting them.
Yep.
And, you know, we won't get those projects up and running if government takes a laissez-faire kind of attitude about, whatever it takes, you do it in your own speed.
Sure.
Because we still have to work harder here in the Territory to get that investment. I mean, a ship lift has been, most of us go, why didn't it happen years ago? But these things are complex.
Yep.
At a time when private sector gets a bit nervous about their own investments. I mean, you've got to balance all these things. A lot of balls are up in the air.
Yep.
But from a government point of view, I think their decision-making has been good about these projects. They're not all going to be winners. Mm-hmm. But when you look at space, when you look at data centres, when you look at some of the growth in agribusiness, the things that we didn't have on our radar particularly, say maybe a decade ago, they're there and they're strong.
Yep.
And of course, defence. I mean, defence is really
sort of
seriously
Yep.
is at defence and tourism, which goes up and down. COVID hit it for 6. Mm-hmm. We've got other issues that are making it difficult for tourism at the moment, but it will always be one of the backbones of our economy.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Economic Reconstruction Commission. So you were part of Team Territory, is that right, at the time? So what were your interactions? So there was the commission, and then there was Team Territory. And is my understanding your role was sort of more of an oversight, advisory role to the commission, or what was those interactions?
Team Territory was made up of business people and people from the community, mainly business people.
Yep.
And we were kind of truth testing the commission's recommendations. So from people who were working in various industries, for people who were working right across the Territory. They would test out some of the recommendations. We would test out some of the recommendations that were being put forward.
Yep. Okay.
So it was a robust thing. And one of the things that, to have an ambition of growing the economy strongly in the next decade was great. To get it to 40 billion, terrific.
Yep.
But it needed a growth of about 4% a year. Mm-hmm. And we haven't made that. But it doesn't mean that the idea of doing it wasn't a good one.
Yep.
So the process that I saw, where you had the kind of Henderson, Liveris and other people on that kind of high-level meta place, and the business people who I was working with, I felt disappointed that kind of got folded away. I think that if we were going to make the recommendations work and really keep them central, focused and with a lot of energy, you needed to keep those business people around the table.
Yep.
Because not only was it government changing their processes, but it was business working with government, making those investments, feeling confident. And I think that to see it kind of for the last 2 or 3 years not being activated, I think it's been a disappointment for me, because I think it could have kept that ambition of growing the economy with an aspirational target.
Yep.
It could have kept it more front and centre.
Right. Is 40 billion by 2030 out of the realms?
Look, from what
realism?
I've seen, I haven't seen all the I haven't seen the inside
numbers,
details,
yeah.
but it's
Yep.
but it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Do you think, come August we get a new government potentially? Do you think that someone, if they come in with a refreshed idea of things, or even just if this current government retains power, is there something that can get us there, or is it just say Sun Cable comes online, hydrogen kicks off, is it possible?
Look, I'm someone who thinks we should get over the big projects.
Right.
For too long we have hung around waiting for the next big project, and whether that's a defence build-up, whether that's what was next after that. We looked at the train, of course. The train was very significant. Whether we're looking at...
As in Alice to
Darwin.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just call it the train.
Is it a white elephant?
Oh, God, no, not
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
Not at all. It's had its ups and downs.
Yep.
But I think it's actually finding its feet, but that's not a good enough. But it is. I think it's a part of the transport in and out of the Territory, and I think
Right.
it's doing well.
Okay.
We always hang our hats on the next big project to kind of take us out of that kind of downtime in the
Sure.
economy. And I think one of the things that the Turk did was to say there are many other aspects of things that will build this economy more sustainably.
Yep.
So, let's look at space, let's look at agribusiness, let's look at tourism, let's look at energy, and not be waiting around for a very big project.
So does that mean sort of empowering SMEs more? What sort of approach does that take, do you think? Like, is it tax reform? Is there some sort of regulatory change we could make?
I think
radical.
the regulatory changes have been made. There was so much regulatory change made a few years ago as a result of the Liveris process.
Okay.
There were raft of legislation.
Like
every
red
agency,
tape busting sort of.
Every agency went through their processes to try and make sure that they weren't doubling up. They talked to other agencies to make sure that there was kind of like a clear line of working for approvals. So I think it's a matter of supporting the various industries that have been focused on. I don't think you need to kind of reinvent the wheel.
Yep.
I mean, we'd love to see agribusiness grow. We'd love to see tourism grow. There's many aspects of that. And there is a pathway forward there. So energy, again, defence, we're seeing a massive build-up, particularly around Katherine.
Sure.
So the elements are there. It's just a matter of government continuing to work with all the, that's in some cases federal government, in some cases it's small local tourist operators, but to do whatever you can to keep that energy going and a proper level of government resourcing into those. So it's incentives, it's grant programs, it's those kind of things.
Sure. You mentioned agribusiness and the Arrows project. That's happening. I think there was an announcement today about restoring the Manton Dam. I think that's a fantastic project. That's one of the best recent government programs or projects that I've seen where there doesn't seem to be any losers. The land was relatively unutilised where the escarpment was that they're going to pump the water from. It's only going to take some wet season flows. I just thought that's a fantastic idea, and in my mind, that's what the territory needs to unlock, economic growth.
Well, in terms of agribusiness, you need water.
That's right.
And you need water for growth of cities and growth of towns. So that was a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to get Manton Dam back online is great.
Yeah.
So they're the kind of things that government can do and not lose the momentum in doing those. And that will then underpin the opportunities that the private sector can take advantage of. But this is a long journey for the territory, and it's going to go up and down in the future. But I think that we've got the elements in place of where we need to go.
Just got to stay the journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think printing money would be great.
Well, some countries do that with sort of unintended. No,
I'm not suggesting printing. No, that's my joke. When small organisations I'm involved with kind of go, how are we going to get more resources in? We need more money.
Yeah.
I'll just go and print some.
Money printing machine. Yeah. So post politics, you've been out of politics for some time now. I think it was 2008. I think you officially
2007.
Okay. They need to update the Wikipedia. How's post-political life been for you? What's been keeping you busy?
Oh, I worked for a few years at the university. I chair a number of different boards. I'm on boards. I was on boards around the country, but now I'm just on boards here in Darwin.
Yep.
So, it's been good to be able to contribute in a different way. I'm now almost 72, so I try and balance some work life with some non-work life.
Yeah. And you're getting to spend much time with the family? Are they sort of in Darwin these days, or where are they?
No, my children are interstate. One in New South Wales and one in Adelaide.
Do you get much chance to visit them?
Many times.
Oh, that's great. So I guess just finally, going forward, how do you see the territory currently? Are we in a good position? Are we in a not so good position? How are we placed, do you think, going forward, and what are sort of the main things that we can sort of focus on? And it's not just an economic thing, it's a cultural thing, spiritually. How do you see the territory placed at the moment? Is it the same place that you came to in, was it 1983 at first? How's it changed? What have we done well? What do we need to work on?
Well, compared with 1983, it's still as hot. And I think if there's one thing that defines Darwin, particularly, it's the heat. And not everyone, as you know, takes to it. I just was talking to a group of people from interstate last night at a dinner, and many of them were going, "This has been so hot." And I thought, no, it's May, this is a good time of year, like, this is fine.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that keeps us, I don't know, as a community that's a little different, is this thing about heat. And I think that we are a very flat society. We don't have kind of those who are the privileged or those who are the wealthy and those who are not. And it's this heat thing. I mean, elsewhere interstate, you'd have people who are dressing beautifully. Here you don't.
Yeah.
You know, when the perspiration's going to run down the back of your legs or down your face, you don't get into that kind of like, you know, you don't pop into a suit and you don't do those kind of things. And I think it's a great leveller and I hope it never changes. I remember sitting at the Pratt markets years ago when Austin Ash was the administrator, and Austin came to the markets in a pair of stubbies and a pair of thongs. And I thought, I love this place. I love it for its unpretentiousness. I think we're still a very strong community. I talk to business quite often, and many businesses are flat out and doing well at the moment.
Yep.
I think our defining issue is the crime we're seeing on the streets. I think that's, for me, it's a very worrying issue. And people say, well, how did you deal with it? And I said it was different. And it was different. I mean, we were dealing with property crime.
Right.
We weren't dealing with the kind of crime we're seeing now, and I find it very worrying.
The violent crime.
Very worrying.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really difficult one to kind of work out what are the best ways to go about. Apart from, you know, doing the usual law and order, there's got to be a whole raft of things that you're putting in place to try and get this under control. And much of it is to do with the disenfranchisement of young Aboriginal people in communities.
Yep.
And that's a massive issue to deal with. I think it's one that we've seen grow over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one that if there was one issue that we needed to deal with, it's that relationship with communities, what we do with young Aboriginal people, what they want to do, and what communities want to do with members of their community.
Is it fixable?
Oh, it's got to be fixable. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, I'm very confident it's fixable. But I think we need to engage more actively with the Aboriginal leadership, because I think it's the Aboriginal leadership who will show the way to fixing the current problem we have. Yeah,
because I guess, you know, that globally at the moment, you know, there's a lot of different approaches to crime. You know, you could look at, I think it's El Salvador. They've just gone full stick, you know, not carrot. They've built these humongous mega prisons and they've pretty much eliminated crime. And I don't think anyone's, you know, suggesting that here, but that's one approach. And then I guess, you know...
Seems a good approach for a lot of recidivism, personally.
That's right. So, you know, I'm guessing that your opinion is probably, you know, something far less extreme than that, but, you know, somewhere in the middle, so to speak. Is that sort of how you see it?
I think that there are people who've worked in this area for a long time. I think we've got to, as I said, we've got to work with the Aboriginal leadership. We've got to work with leadership everywhere, because it's not a problem that government's going to be able to fix by itself.
Yeah,
absolutely not. And we need to. The experts in this area. I'm not one of the experts, but we need to really get a strong territory kind of voice about how we're going to do it, and that's a voice with many different aspects to it. Mm-hmm. I'm not a supporter of just building bigger and bigger jails. I think it's counterproductive.
But I'm guessing you're also a supporter of not just, you know, the turnstile of, you know, criminals as well, you know, letting them back onto the street, that sort of thing. There's got to be a sort of a fundamental middle ground where those two things meet.
It doesn't work for the community when there's a high recidivism rate. It doesn't work.
No.
And what you want to do is to be able to work with those in the system to make sure, or to do everything you can to make sure they're not coming back again. Yep,
agreed.
But I'm not someone who says we shouldn't have a prison. Absolutely, there are people who need to spend time away from the community.
Yep. Well, I don't have any more questions, and I really appreciate you coming in and spending time with us today. Usually at this point, if there's anything you'd like to promote or anything, you know, we can give you a minute to just have the floor, and if there's anything you'd like, you know, people at home to know, now's your time.
Oh, well, that's a nice offer. What can I do? I mean, one of the organisations I chair is the Museum and Art Gallery.
Okay.
And there has been some discussion about why is government building another museum and art gallery in the city.
Yep.
And I suppose this is a chance to explain what we're doing. The Bullocky Point Museum and Art Gallery, which is one of 7 properties of the museum. The art will be taken from there and put in the art gallery in the city. So it means that Bullocky Point is currently going through a master planning process. It will be history, science and Aboriginal culture in the future. So there will be 2 museum and art galleries in Darwin. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity. We have some of the best, we have great collections of art all stacked away in storage, and it will be an opportunity for people to see what we've got and enjoy it. So a couple of years, the art gallery in the city will be open.
And will people have an opportunity to comment on that Bullocky Point master plan at all?
It's been undertaken now, and I can't tell you exactly.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be made public. We don't want to.
Sure.
We don't want to not have the community supporting what we're doing.
Yep. And do you know?
And the more community support to get the funds to make it happen is great.
Yeah, because there's also the Vesties or the Bundilla. That's out for public consultation.
And
is that sort of tied
City
in?
of Darwin.
Is that,
and so
okay.
they'll talk to each other, of course.
Okay.
But that's City of Darwin, and it's territory government level who does the museum.
All right, so people can just keep a lookout for those.
Remember Paul Everingham, our first Chief Minister, told me last year, he said, I just want you to remember, Clare, that our first capital works project when we became the government of the territory was the Museum and Art Gallery. First one off the books.
There you go. I was going to say like the Stuart Highway or whatever, like the bitumenising of that one, no?
First building they did.
Well, there you go.
So it needs a little TLC these days.
On that note, Clare Martin, really appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.